What astronauts never say about coming back to Earth. The hardest part of spaceflight isn't launch. It isn't re-entry. It comes afterward, when the mission is over and no one is watching anymore. From the outside, returning home looks like relief, gravity, familiar air, applause. But for many astronauts, the real challenge begins once the celebration fades. The cameras follow the landing. The press conferences document the immediate return. The public narrative of homecoming is written around arrival, around the moment of reunion, around the image of a crew emerging from the vehicle and stepping back onto solid ground. What that narrative does not follow is what happens in the weeks and months after that moment. To understand why this matters today, we need to understand what space takes from you quietly. In orbit, life is simplified. Purpose is clear. Every action matters. Every day has structure. The simplification is not accidental. The environment demands it. When the stakes are survival and mission success, distractions become functionally impossible. The complexity that characterizes ordinary life on Earth, the competing priorities, the ambiguous choices, the noise of relationships and obligations and social performance, all of it falls away. What remains is essential. And essential, it turns out, feels very different from ordinary. Then suddenly, it's gone. The astronaut stepped back onto Earth surrounded by noise, movement, and expectation. Cameras flashed. Questions came quickly. Smiles were required. The return ceremony is a public event, and the returning crew member is expected to perform within it. There is a role to fill, an expression to hold, a set of appropriate responses to deliver. The astronaut delivers them. The performance is genuine enough on the surface. But beneath it, something is not yet aligned. But inside, something felt misaligned. The world moved too fast. Conversations felt scattered. Problems felt strangely loud compared to the silence of space. This is not cognitive failure. It is recalibration lag. The nervous system spent months adjusting to an environment where every input was signal, where background noise was minimal, where the ratio of meaningful information to meaningless noise was extraordinarily high. Returning to an environment where that ratio is reversed does not produce immediate readjustment. It produces something closer to overwhelm. This wasn't disappointment. It was disorientation. And it was something no one had warned them about. In space, life is reduced to essentials. Breathe, work, sleep, cooperate. Every action has purpose, and every decision matters. The reduction is total and complete. There are no decisions that do not matter. There are no interactions that are not in some way consequential. The crew member exists inside a closed system where every variable is relevant. This produces a quality of engagement with daily experience that has no direct equivalent on Earth outside of very few extreme contexts. Back on Earth, purpose fragments. The astronaut noticed it immediately. Endless choices, competing priorities, conversations layered with noise and distraction. The clarity of orbit was gone. The range of available choices on Earth is vast. What to eat, what to wear, how to spend the evening, which of a dozen different requests to respond to first. In orbit, these decisions are largely made for you by schedule and necessity. The return of choice feels, paradoxically, like a formal loss. Freedom and clarity do not always coexist comfortably. Gravity felt heavy, but not just on the body, on the mind. Days filled quickly, yet meaning felt diluted. Small problems demanded attention with the same urgency as critical ones. One of the most disorienting features of ordinary life is the absence of a triage system. Everything competes for attention on roughly equal terms. The trivial and the important arrive in the same inbox, interrupt in the same tone of voice, demand response with the same apparent urgency. An astronaut accustomed to environments where triage is constant and automatic finds this flattening of priority acutely uncomfortable. People asked what space was like. The astronaut answered politely, "Beautiful, challenging, incredible." But those words skipped the harder truth. They were accurate in the way that postcards are accurate. They captured something real about the visual and emotional experience, but they could not convey the texture of the deeper change. How do you explain to someone who has never been simplified by necessity that you are mourning the loss of that simplification? No one asked how it felt to lose the simplicity of survival. In orbit, distractions disappear. On Earth, they multiply. Focus becomes optional. Structure dissolves unless you rebuild it yourself. The rebuilding requires deliberate effort. It does not happen by returning to old habits, because old habits were formed in a context that no longer quite fits. The astronaut must construct something new, using the material of the old environment while incorporating what space made visible. This was the quiet conflict, not trauma, not regret, but loss of alignment. The astronaut had returned to the world they always wanted to go back to, and still, something was missing. The adjustment took time, longer than expected. Weeks turned into months. The astronaut learned to slow down again, not physically, but mentally. The physical recovery from spaceflight is well documented. Bone density, muscle atrophy, fluid redistribution. Space agencies monitor these changes carefully and provide rehabilitation programs designed to address them. The psychological recovery is less well documented and less systematically supported, yet in some ways it is more disorienting. In space, priorities are clear because survival demands it. On Earth, priorities blur because survival feels guaranteed. When survival is not immediately at stake, the framework that organizes decision-making must be constructed rather than assumed. The astronaut who has spent months operating inside a framework provided by necessity must now build one from scratch inside an environment that provides no such structure automatically. That is harder than it sounds. The astronaut became more selective, less reactive. Noise no longer demanded immediate response. That shift confused some people. Distance replaced urgency. The people in the astronaut's life had expectations formed during the years before departure. They expected a particular kind of engagement, a familiar rhythm of availability and response. The returned astronaut did not always meet those expectations, not from indifference, but from a recalibration of what deserves attention and what can wait. There was also a quiet grief, not for space itself, but for the version of clarity it provided, for the feeling of being exactly where you were meant to be. Grief for a state of clarity is an unusual form of mourning because the thing mourned is not a person or a place, but a quality of experience. It cannot be revisited, only remembered. And the remembering keeps the comparison alive. This is what full alignment felt like, and this is the distance between that and now. This experience reshaped how the astronaut measured success, not by volume or speed, but by meaning. Depth replaced urgency. The metrics that had organized life before space no longer held the same authority. Productivity, output, response rate, schedule density. These had been reliable proxies for purposeful activity. Space had revealed what purposeful activity actually felt like from the inside. The proxies were no longer convincing. The conflict was internal. How do you carry the stillness of space into a world that thrives on motion? The answer came slowly. You don't try to recreate orbit. You translate it. And that translation changes everything. Over time, the astronaut found balance, not by rejecting Earth, but by reshaping how they lived on it. The translation is not a matter of importing one environment's conditions into another. It is a matter of identifying the principles that made the orbital experience meaningful and finding ways to apply those principles within the very different conditions of ordinary life. That work is slow and requires honesty about what specifically was valuable and what was simply the absence of complication. Space had stripped life down to what mattered. Coming home meant deciding what to keep, This is perhaps the most practical and most demanding outcome of the experience. The stripping happened automatically, by circumstance. The keeping requires choice. Every element of the pre-departure life must now be evaluated rather than assumed. That evaluation is uncomfortable. It involves looking clearly at habits, relationships, commitments, and routines, and asking, does this serve what I now understand to matter? They became intentional with attention, careful with commitments, aware of how easily meaning can be diluted by excess. Intentionality with attention is not the same as withdrawal. It does not mean doing less. It means choosing more carefully which things to do fully, and being honest about the cost of trying to do everything at equal intensity. The astronaut had learned what full attention felt like, and had learned that distributing it too widely diluted it past usefulness. This story matters because it isn't about space. It's about return, about what happens when clarity meets complexity. Most of us never leave Earth, but we still experience versions of this transition. Finishing a chapter, leaving a role, returning change to a familiar place. Astronauts rarely speak about this part because it doesn't sound heroic, but it's real, and it reminds us that sometimes the hardest journey isn't outward, it's learning how to come back. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? What